Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everybody. My name is Joey Dabrowski, and together with Max Falcone, we're going to moderate this Earth Day live panel, Climate Education at COP28. I would like to welcome our incredible speakers, who are the champions of climate and education, and who all believe that climate education is one of the most fundamental solutions towards solving climate change. We gather here today because this week we mark Earth Day for the 73rd time in the history. Earth Day was the biggest event, the biggest mobilization in human history for environment and climate. And I'm very happy that together with our speakers, we can discover why we should put climate education first, especially this year during the biggest climate event, which is the COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, and also why we should put climate education first in the national curricula worldwide. Because the more we educate our societies, the better our response to climate change is. So let's prioritize climate education this year. I would like to pass to Max Falcone to present our incredible speakers.
Hi, everyone. I don't want to spend too much time talking because here we have the host of this week, the Earth Day week, Miss Kathleen Rogers, who is the president of Earth Day. Please, Kathleen, what's your mission and how do you tackle climate change by climate education?
Well, I think as most of you know, we've been involved in climate education, my organization, since 1970. In fact, the very first thing that the president at the time, Richard Nixon, did within 3 weeks after the first Earth Day was to sign the National Environmental Education Act, which was extraordinary for the time. And he called on all Americans to put climate education in every classroom and every subject. Since that time, we've had a certainly uneven landscape around climate education worldwide. And the World Bank financed Earth Day some years back to do a real study of quite a number of countries and to see if what they said they were teaching on environment and climate actually matched up with the reality. And it did not, unfortunately. And this campaign that we're running, and through the extraordinary efforts, really not just of Earth Day, but everyone on this panel, as well as 400 million other people who've signed on to the petition for climate education, which is extraordinary. Now, those are groups that are part of large memberships, but even the Vatican and other faith groups have joined us because we all believe that climate literacy will create a pathway to equity in both the green economy. It will teach people civic skills, and it will help them support their governments that are doing the right thing. So we're excited about it. But for all of us, we've been working country by country, but we have such extraordinarily enlightened people on this panel who believe that whether it's GPE or Education International or COP28, that we can get the job done quickly and provide both the education on the science, but much more important, create innovation, invention, entrepreneurship, and a pipeline to jobs and to build equitable green economies in all countries rather than just a handful. So I'm really pleased to be here and share the stage with such extraordinary people.
Thank you, Kathleen. You are already quoting some of our speakers. And speaking of quality education, we have here Laura Fijanti, who is the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education. So Laura, how is your organization tackling climate change to education, and what's education? So what's your mission? What's education for the Global Partnership for Education?
Thank you, Max, for having me. I mean, I'm particularly happy to be here with this fantastic panel and the many people that are watching us to celebrate Earth Days. The Global Partnership for Education, as many of you know, is the largest fund that is exclusively dedicated to financing the transformation of education system in the Global South. We are actively working in more than 90 countries, all the low income, most of the middle income countries. And recently, obviously, governments have been turning to the question of how the education system can be used to actually improve the performance of the countries on the climate change agenda. And if you think about, education, obviously, education has many different dimensions. There is a dimensions of improving individual skills, and so preparing, young people to acquire the green skills that are needed for the jobs of the future, that we all hope that are going to be green jobs or more and more green jobs. But there is also the dimensions that education is really a way of creating better citizens. And so is probably the easiest, fastest, and most successful way of reaching out to a very large number of people and teach them all those actions that in our individual life we have to perform, that if done correctly can have a very positive impact on the environment. Let's think about how we recycle, for example. Let's think about how we use natural resources that are accessible to us. Let's think about in many of the global south countries how people can use the limited resources that they have in terms of water, in terms of woods, in terms of soil conservation, etc., etc. So you see that there is really a big range of things that through school can reach children, and through children the communities of which they are part. And so we are particularly happy that we have started embarking on this agenda with many countries, and we have recently put together a framework that will help countries understanding what the right policies are on to use education for climate change.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, because you said that better citizens we will have better citizens through education. And these better citizens are the citizens who are pushing for results, real output in the next COP, in the next COP28. And here we have Sarah Shaw, who is the partnership department of the COP28. So, Sarah, starting from the green jobs that Laura was speaking of, how is the COP28 managing this concept, and what's your mission? What's your goal?
So thank you so much, first of all, for including COP28 in today's panel. I think it's an absolute honor to be in the room with so many wonderful people. When we talk about green skills, LinkedIn launched a report, this was, I think, back in 2021, where it said that there is a 6% increase annually on green skills demand, but the supply isn't there. And that's what I think is a wonderful opportunity for many organizations to consider. How might we support in enabling more capable people to be in the pipeline for green skills as a demand? And education is absolutely key, whether that's from secondary education, so K to 12, or even tertiary education. And one of the things that we are very clear about within COP28 is youth is the key. The first time within the history of COP, we're introducing the Youth Climate Champion, and their role, Her Excellency Shem El-Mazroui, who is also our Minister of Community Development, is to really embed youth and youth's voice and advocate for their active participation within the COP process. And that happens at multiple levels. And just to shed a little bit of light, there's a lot of work that's happening around the world, whether it's the Green Education Partnerships, GPE, our colleagues in the UNESCO. There are a lot of efforts that are there, and what we're looking to do within COP28 is really accelerating that, pushing it forward through coalitions that are all about making reality happen today, not 2 years from now, not 5 years from now. And the UAE is very well known for that. We leapfrog over the last 50 years. If you look at our history, we've done immense work thanks to the guidance of our leadership, and we're very lucky to be in the nation that we live in.
Thank you, Sarah. So youth is the key, and education is targeting the youth. But the youth were asking for a better quality education, and teachers are the ones who are providing education. So we have here Aldis Host, who is the Deputy General Secretary of Education International, the biggest union of educators and teachers all around the world. So please, Haldis, what do you think, what's your goal? How are you helping us, supporting us in reaching these goals that we're starting to discover during this panel?
Well, thank you, Max. And I'd also thank you all for inviting us in here and for the great work that everyone on this show is doing. I think you started with what the purpose for us is, because the purpose for us as teachers and educators is to contribute as professionals to create the best possible education for our students that is relevant for their future, based on what they see they want. Now, we know that there are very many teachers, and we had registered it, that have been working quite actively on climate change education for a long time. You know, we talk about Earth Day from 1970. We have teachers, again, narratives that are equally old. But we also noticed that it wasn't systematic. It was too much dependent on the individual of them making a specific effort. But if we're going to transform systems, like Laura from GPE also talked about, we have to connect the dots. So we want to contribute with all the professionals that we have, 32 million out there, to make sure that we can put all that knowledge together and to push forward to make a change. So we launched a campaign 2 years ago in connection with Earth Day, and our campaign was titled Teach for the Planet, where our first goal was COP26. Now we've kept it going, and we're going to keep going until COP28 and beyond that, as long as we need. As part of that, we've developed a manifesto where we define what we believe climate change education is. I'll speak more about that later, but also what we think we need as professionals to be able to deliver that quality education on climate change, and the demands that we have to countries, to governments, because they are the ones that give us mandates as teachers. They are the ones that create the framework for education. So we are trying to support our members in this. We are conducting research to give them evidence. We have created a climate network to make sure they can exchange information, experience, both on classroom practice, but also on advocacy strategies. What has worked, what hasn't worked. Share good ideas. And we will continue to support with them and will work, as I said, first of all, towards COP28, but beyond. But in between, this has to happen every day at national level, because you have to work bottom up. Whatever you decide at the big international meetings will not happen if they're not linked back to what happens on the ground, and that you have systems that support it.
So to be linked to what's happening on the ground at the local level. So the civil society is fundamental, and the young people, the young generations, who are, let's say, in the majority, the students, are fundamental in order maybe to co-design the curricula and co-design what they are learning together with the teachers. So, Marlene Garcia, you are the civil society and the young representative of this civil society. Marlene Garcia is the executive director for Uprising International, and at the same moment she is a community education organizer at Youth versus Apocalypse. Can you explain us, Marlene, what's your role, what's your mission, and how do you match what we're discussing now here?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So with Earth Uprising International, right now we are a nonprofit that is completely youth-led, including our board. It's 100% youth. And we are focusing on centering education and reparative justice and solutions for a just transition and a more equitable and regenerative economy. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me okay? There's like the dog. Yeah, okay. And so we've actually been working a lot on the education side of things, in the sense that so we have different boards, different branches, and each branch is focused on education in a different way or manner depending on the forms of activism that youth are participating in. We have our law and policy branch, and our directors there are really focused on providing toolkits and guidance on what it is, educational resources about, taking climate action through policy and through law. Then we have social media. How can we really put all this information about climate change, environmental inequalities, youth activism, and really empowering the voices and the stories of youth in media. And then we have our educational and scholars branch. Education right now is really focused on, we're like really proud of doing this thing called an environmental school tour. And right now in Africa, actually, one of our members has covered over 30 schools. And what's happening there in our environmental school tours is that they are giving presentations on climate change and environmental inequalities, but specifically how it's impacting the communities there. As we all know, climate change is disproportionately affecting communities in different ways. And so these youth, coming from the community, recognize how it's affecting them. And so when they give these presentations and do this kind of education amongst like their peers, it really creates that like connection, like, okay, this is how it's directly impacting us. It's not just this is what climate change is. It's more, it goes beyond that and really connects the education and the information to the community, to the youth themselves. And along that, we're planting trees, trying to restore the environment, and taking nature walks and providing natural other important like hygiene resources. And this is just like an example of why it's like really important to have youth, teach youth, especially youth who are already involved in the process, because we talk a lot about like, let's get youth involved. How can we educate them? But we really have to also keep in mind that we have to provide that support, especially, which I'll talk more about, but supporting youth to educate youth, I think, is a very important part of all of this. So, yeah.
Okay, so supporting youth to educate youth, and you're talking a lot of relations and links with your peers. And we have here a peer who is Johnny Dabrowski, who was funding or one of the funders of the Climate Education Coalition. So, Johnny, I think that the floor is yours in order to start to ask something to our great panelists. Please, Johnny.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, so as Served.org, we're one of the members of the Climate Education Coalition, and together with more than 100 organizations and individuals, we have created the open letter to the COP28 Presidency, where we all ask the presidency to prioritize climate education at COP28. And I think what's the most important thing is that we would like for ministers of education, for policymakers, for ministers of finance, for heads of states, not to sign declarations or make empty promises. We would like for them to commit to actions and to commit to funding for these actions, especially for climate education at schools in particular countries. And this is what we're hoping for very much from the COP28. So I would like to ask one of our speakers, Ms. Sarah Shaw from the COP28 Presidency, what are the actions taken by the UAE Presidency and the UAE Ministry of Education to prioritize climate education at COP28, especially in this context of direct engagement of policymakers to commit to climate education in the NDCs, in the school curricula?
Brilliant question, Johnny, and thank you so much for the opportunity to shed some light on what has happened, what is happening, and what we hope will happen. So the UAE, for the better part of 2 decades, has been actively working around this whole concept of creating sustainable schools, providing programming within schools to help educate our students in public schools within the UAE. there is very ambitious plans at the moment happening. So if you think about 1998 to 2010, we had a lot of initiatives with the World Wildlife Fund. We have the Emirates World Wildlife Society. We have obviously attempts from the UNESCO to really embed what we're calling the Green Schools Initiative within our public system and even our private schools. So to give you just an idea, in 2009, we had 26 sustainable schools. 6 years later, we had over 150 sustainable schools. And what that means is their teachers have been trained, their students have been exposed to some of the key needs and some of the key challenges that exist within climate change itself. And where we're heading towards now is something that is beyond just literacy. We're, as His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, our COP president designate, we're a COP of action. We want things to be happening on the ground, going to my colleague's comment earlier on. So one of the things that the UAE's Ministry of Education is going to be launching, hopefully, is an entire scheme and plan to help revolutionize how climate education happens within our public schools, but also within our private schools. Some policies will be announced. Hopefully, we'll be waiting for that soon. And I'd rather let the Ministry of Education take care of that. But what we want as a presidency so far is we want to make sure that climate action education is actually embedded within schools. A lot of students now have access to information at their fingertips. And the first question they ask is, what can I do? And whether it's students, whether it's teachers, whether it's school leaders, whether it's the community that they serve surrounding them, we want to be able to give them that answer. And as a result of that, what we would like to create is something similar to what you have, but at the heads of state, if not at the ministers of education level. We want to create a coalition of nations that set the bar for all other nations to follow. These are the nations that have interest, that are willing to take the distance and go the distance with us, who want to work in a co-creative manner to really build something that's quite unique in the way that it can be embedded within their systems. Somebody who's an educator myself, if you want to change one small thing within the education system, it's a big, massive change if you want to do it at the system-wide level. So we really want to think about best practices, making sure that we're representative of global North and global South, making sure that we enable these youth. I mean, just recently we announced the International Youth Delegates Program, where the UAE is actually supporting in the empowerment of 100 youth internationally to be part of the COP process. Now, my question is, what happens next year? Who will take care of that enablement and empowerment of youth? And my answer to that is universities and schools. Now, how might I make that something that is systemic, sustainable, able to take the test of time? So that's kind of the work that we're doing at the moment when it comes to the education priority within COP28 itself.
So, thank you a lot, Johnny. May I ask something? Because I was inspired by what Sarah was saying, because she's saying that embedding climate education in the schools and training the teachers is the key. But funding for quality education for the partner countries, for, let's say, what we are calling developing countries, is crucial for the success of global response to climate change. Laura from GP. So Laura, the CEO of GP, how are you driving these? So why funding for quality education is crucial for this response to climate change?
Well, I think that education, as we all know, is in itself, without even thinking about major transformation, is a very expensive sector because it's highly labor intensive. So that is one part. During COVID, education also lost a lot of the gains made in the past 2 decades in terms of access and improving on quality. So there is really need to have massive investment to recoup some of those losses. Plus, there is this whole process of transforming education. Some of the other speakers on this panel were talking about the more active role than youth want to play in co-designing the curriculum, the need to use education to create those green skills that will lead hopefully to green jobs, the needs to create better citizens, etc., etc. All this requires massive investment that the sector at the moment doesn't have. And unfortunately, this is not, how can I say, the easiest moment in the history of global development, because there are so many competing priorities that are occupying the focus of global leaders at the same time. So we really need to argue in a very stringent way the case for education, because education has benefits that go beyond the education sector in itself. And as we are saying, education obviously is important because it transforms individual life, but education is also very important because education transforms society. So by teaching young students, particularly, I would say young girls, because girls, we know that they have a multiplier effect on communities, on their family. They become mothers and they teach things to their children, all the good practices that they have learned. So it is very, very important that there is at this moment a massive investment in curricula, in making sure that teachers are prepared to to actually be the agent of this transformation of the education sector, and to make sure that there is the material, the textbooks, all that is needed. So in this sense, it's really important that at this moment, the leaders of the world put their resources where they think that their heart is.
Thank you a lot, Laura, because you said that education transforms individual life and transforms societies. So educators are the ones who are the change makers somehow. That's why Aldis, connecting to you, so from creating a link between what Laura was saying and the role of Education International. How can we integrate climate education to the school curricula, and what's your role as union in this process? Because if we integrate climate education, as Laura was saying, we transform the individual behavior and we transform the society through your role. So that's your role. How do you do that?
How do we do that? And well, it's a big task, but we believe that we can do it because we want to transform lives. And, I love that saying, being a teacher. We're into the T's here, transforming teachers. And I'm coming to more T's. That's why some of us became teachers, because it is a very fascinating job, but it can also be very frustrating when you feel that you want to support this transformation, but you just don't have the framework to be able to do it. And the most important framework for a teacher is the curricular and the education sector plans, as JPE supports developing, because that's the mandate you have as a professional. That's what gives you the space for you to do your job. And if climate change education isn't mentioned in a country's curriculum, it's very difficult for a teacher to create the space in the classroom to make this happen together with their students. Because I truly believe, as I said, that it is about doing it together with the students. And by the way, the most high level of learning is when you're able to share it with others and teach again. So I perfectly support that youth need to educate youth, but teachers can help facilitate that in the classroom. So we need to change curriculums. UNESCO did research that across 100 countries, only 53% of national curriculum frameworks include climate change education. And in many of them, it wasn't controversial. It was only to a little extent. And we actually believe that for this to be a proper basis for teachers to teach and students to learn, it has to be something that is transversal. It almost has to be something about the core and the purpose of education in a country. It cannot emerge as a small topic under science teaching or a small topic under another subject. It has to be a collective responsibility given to teachers, to the system, by those responsible, which are the governments in countries. So that must be reflected all the way through. And there are very many ways of doing it. It's also of making all teachers responsible, not just the science teacher or the geography teacher or whatever. This is everyone's responsibility. Then we come to the T's. To be able to do this, you've mentioned several of them, because you need the tools to be able to do that teaching. That means that you need education material that is up to date, that is culturally relevant. You can't use the same tools everywhere, especially when it comes to the youngest children. You start with what is relevant in your community and you work towards the global. You see something that is gender responsive, as Laura talked about, linguistically appropriate, and also which respects the knowledge of indigenous peoples that already exist there. You need time. You need to feel that you have the mandate to use time on this in the classroom. And remember, what you test, what you monitor, what you report back on is what is considered important. So you don't only ask, what are your results on the math test and the literary test? You ask, what are you doing on climate change education? You need trust. Another T. The teachers, the professionals need to know that they are trusted and allowed to do this in the classroom without being questioned from the outside whether it's relevant or not. And you need training, as has been mentioned. Most of the teachers out there, even the trained in my time, this wasn't on the agenda when we were trained as teachers. You need continuous professional development, also because you're constantly have new knowledge, that you need the knowledge as the basis of developing the skills. It's about knowledge, but it's not just about that. We have to teach our students to be able to use the knowledge to become active citizens in their own lives. Some of them will become activists for climate change. Some of them will not, but they are still activists in their own lives and choose how they live at home, and also see the opportunities of building their green skills and looking for their green jobs, whether that is creating their own jobs or whether it is applying for jobs that exist out there. And that is quite high level learning. And this does need financing, yes. All transformation needs financing because it's about creating something new. Now, we believe that the basis of that financing has to be through the government financing, has to be through the public sector. They can be supported from outside, but that's about those responsible taking responsibility for investing in what is most important for their future of their countries, and that's their children, and that's their education system, because that's what prepares it. So along with Feast for the Planet, we also have a campaign that is Go Public, Fund Education. That is what it's about. So I think I'll leave it there. I can continue for a long time. But remember all these good ideas out there, because, Marlene was talking about it, planting trees and everything. And you have the small ones, the recycling at school. Oh, maybe we should start thinking about rebuilding the neighborhood school instead of these gigantic schools where we have to transport children to get there. School buses go electric instead of being on fossil fuels. That you reintroduce learning basic skills, sewing, redesigning, reusing, recycling. There's loads of things that can be done, but it has to be put into context and has to be systematized and has to be acknowledged as important.
Alice, so you said that this is a fascinating job, and we see that in the passion you have, but there is a huge responsibility. This is the other word you were using. So I would like to ask to the target, and let's ask to Johnny, who was one of the youth, or one of the young leaders or activists who were asking for quality climate education. So Johnny, please, asking to you and asking to you to relate with our panelists, with our speakers. What's next?
Absolutely.
What's next from your viewpoint? So from the students' viewpoint.
Well, I think that what Ms. Host also said is that education makes leaders, leaders of tomorrow. And it is about the level of education and the quality of education and its content of what leaders we build. And if we want to live in a world where nature, biodiversity is one of the shared values between the policymakers, we need to have climate education provided for everybody. Also for the students that will in the future become the leaders of their cities, countries, of their regions, especially female leaders. And I would like to ask Marlon about the women's education in context of the climate crisis. And what do you think, why does women education and women empowerment have to do with effective climate action, and why we can't fight climate change without justice in the society?
Thank you for that question. So there's two parts to this. I'm going to focus first on the women's education and empowerment and what it has to do with effective climate action. As I mentioned a little before previously, climate change and its impacts disproportionately affects communities in different ways. I believe it was mentioned too that women in specifically impacted in a very unique and specific way as well. Specifically with like seeing them having to deal with high infant mortality rates, as pregnant women having less access to health, especially while dealing with the impacts of climate change. So while we have wildfires, droughts, tsunamis, all these, high heat weather. So it's important to educate and empower them in order for them to be prepared to, one, adjust to and kind of mitigate the effects of climate change right now as we work towards reducing its impacts and the way it affects specific communities. Um, and and quite frankly, there hasn't been enough women representation in many spaces, especially in the decision making spaces. So without having their stories, their experiences, and even their ideas to how we can better assist women as they're being affected by the impacts of climate change. Um, they can provide better solutions. So giving everyone the education about how climate change impacts communities in different ways, and like in the context of sex and gender. The LGBTQ plus community too also is impacted in a different way, in a unique way, in a specific way. So, for example, the LGBTQ plus community makes up a good proportion of the homelessness community here um, in California. So when we are experiencing high temperatures, like crazy heat, they don't have the home or the security that they need to deal with these kind of changes. So they don't have water, they don't have cooling systems, they don't have anything. So again, it's really important that we educate our communities about this, and really that's like the groundwork for one, prepare mitigating and preparing as we reduce the impacts. So that's that. In terms of why we can't fight climate change without justice in society, this one's a very complex question that honestly consists of also a very long answer, but I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I possibly could. The short answer is that intersectionalities or social justice is climate justice. One specific way to see this is that one, like without getting into the complexities of it, humans are part of nature. So anything that happens to us on the social realm of things really just means that we're also advocating for environmental justice. In the more complex answer to this is that, and I'm gonna give an example actually. So For me, I didn't know. I grew up in a community that's in the front lines. I would have nosebleeds, headaches, migraines. In my community too, there's also high rates of infant mortality rates, youth with asthma, because of the California fires. And so a lot of us couldn't really give an explanation as to why we were experiencing this. And a big part of it is because a lot of us that come from BIPOC or marginalized and oppressed communities, that experience the kind of social injustices, are more focused on dealing with those barriers. So for me, I come from a family of immigrants. I couldn't really focus or give more attention to the nosebleeds or the migraines, because when my dad was captured by ICE, I was more focused on that. How can I make sure we can bring my father back? And also dealing with the mental components of that. Family separation has huge impacts on youth, mental health impacts. So it's important that we address social justice issues, or at least support marginalized communities, so that they can give the focus and the prioritization that is needed for the climate crisis. You can't help or expect us to choose one or the other. You can't expect me to choose between, saving the world, educating about climate, educating about environmental inequality, and even learning about it, while also expecting me to, help out my family so that my parent, that our immigration matters. Or I come from a community that's also has a low socioeconomic status. So our educational resources aren't as accessible and aren't the same compared to others. And so you can't expect me to put in 20 more extra hours of studying and independent you know um, research without and then also asking me or other youth to come save the planet or educate about climate justice. So it's really important that we really also focus on the justice side of things, on the social justice side of things, just because in us supporting and addressing those, we can create a more welcoming environment for youth and other communities to come in and actually be fully present in taking climate action. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Marlon. I think that was very important to hear. I think it's important to remember that we are all different, living in different circumstances in different regions. When I could say that climate empowerment in my high school could be to have photovoltaic panels on the roof, it couldn't be said for people my age who maybe don't have schools in their places. And this is the first step in their regions. That's why I think that quality education is very much intersected with climate education here. And I remember what Ms. Fijanti said a few minutes ago, that now we don't have education on the priority, or we have problems with having it as a priority. And I deeply believe it should, because if we want to create a climate conscious society, especially with leaders, we need to do it now, not in 20 years, not in 30. Because even if we solve climate change, what's next? We'll do it again if we don't learn our mistakes. And that is education, I think. That's why we absolutely need to push for political will, for funding education, quality education, and climate education in the countries. And so I would like to ask Kathleen Waters, what is the progress made for climate education worldwide? What is to be done? And what is the role of earthday.org in creating a climate conscious society worldwide?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think whether it's equity or justice, it's got to be about what's happening in the world. There's $73 trillion being invested in the green economy, and most of it will benefit the global north, if not entirely. In fact, the way things are going, northern countries are extracting resources to build green products so they can sell them back to the global south. And in our conversations with the leadership, and these are foreign affairs, education ministers, environmental ministers, business leaders, they are super anxious in the Global South to have that opportunity to teach everything Haldis said, everything everything we're talking about here really relates back to how we can build an educated K through 12 university grad school population. And we can do this in 4 or 5 years. It doesn't take a generation. So that those countries can be ready for, trained for, and leading their countries into prosperity around the green economy before, as I suspect, it will end up like the tech revolution, being owned by a handful of companies. In my experience at TESS and other travels around the world, the finance leadership of the world, of the countries, the education ministers, literally are clinging to the hope that they will be able to raise the money to educate their students all the way through, including grad school, because they think it's a key to developing a pipeline for jobs. They also believe deeply that with the right help, all the things we outlined here, that they will be able to participate fully in the green economy, so that they will be, it will be an even playing field, which it is currently not at all. And so I found the most extraordinary enthusiasm from Global South leaders, because they deeply believe that the key to their current and future prosperity is around education. Now, we have to be, as everyone said, cognizant of the differences of the levels of funding that are available for education. And with the incredible significant amounts of money that GPE is providing, with the push that Education International is doing and the COP presidency, I do believe we can elevate this issue. I learned from Education International that most countries receive less than 4% of their education money from outside their own country. And given they have to raise it from their tax base or property, whatever it is that they use in a formula, it's quite obvious that not all countries have the same capacity to teach and train their students. But it is Earth Day's absolute goal to make climate literacy part and parcel of the green economy. And that means not just educating them on the science, because the science, of course, is very negative, but to really integrate it all through school. And parenthetically, New Jersey is probably one of the most advanced places for climate literacy. They're teaching it in every subject, every grade, all the way down to gym classes. And why? Because they have local New Jersey companies that are global companies that are have their headquarters in New Jersey, are pushing for a pipelines to jobs. That's why we got Microsoft and UPS, and we're working on most of the major US companies for statements that will support what's going to happen at COP28, what's happening with Education International, and support donor countries to the GPE, because we believe deeply that we can, with education and with company support, make sure that every company has access to the curricula, training, and jobs pipeline. That is our goal straight across the board. And interestingly, and it's the last thing I'll say, is every technological revolution in the world has had an education component. And the Industrial Revolution is probably the starkest and most straightforward, although the tech revolution was the same. It wasn't the US government or the British government or the now EU countries that pushed for universal education. It was Carnegie's and the titans of industry that said, we need people who can read and write to come into the industrial complex that we're developing, and we cannot do it. So please institute mandatory education around, in the industrialized countries, so that they could provide a steady pipeline of jobs. The same thing with the tech revolution in the United States and abroad and everywhere else, where they began to teach how to use computers, making them available for no other reason that they wanted people to come and work there, and they wanted them to buy them. So we have all three components for us. It's jobs, it's citizen participation, it's the green consumer movement, and of course, having people support and or elect governments that will follow that pathway to that prosperity. So for us, even though we're a global education organization and our mission is to educate and activate people. We deeply believe that there's a direct connection between jobs, equity, and climate literacy.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you a lot for this inspiring review of what we should do and what we are doing. I think that at this point is coming to my mind that we would like to know from each one of the speakers, 1 minute each one, fast answer. If you have, of course you have, which are your plans for climate education at COP28? Let's start from the COP28 herself, from Sarah at this point. Later, I would like to go to Laura, Heldi, Marlene, and Kathleen. You already said, but just to close that. So please, Sarah.
Sure. Thank you so much. Although I am not an official representative of COP28, but I am somebody who does work there and is working on the education file. For us, 3 things, more than anything else, that we would like to achieve by COP28. Number 1 is to find this League of Nations that are representative of the global North and global South, who are very keen on showing best practices, clear and serious commitments within their education systems. So that's the first one. Within those League of Nations, we would like to identify opportunities for how climate literacy can be embedded, whether you are a global North, you're a global South, you're a CID. We want to show how these practices can be implemented and provide resources for that through those nations. So it's almost like the pioneers for everybody else to sort of be inspired by, follow suit, want to become. So we want to set that bar. And then, like I said prior, we want to have this opportunity to create a platform. When somebody says, I want to go and become climate literate, where is the go-to? Does Khan Academy have that? Does Earth Day have that? What's the platform? And then over and above that, what language is it available in? In the Global South, you've got so many different languages, and we have to be able to provide for that open source. And then the last one is we want to make sure that every single COP from this COP has a youth climate champion. In order for that to happen, you need a pipeline of talent who are ready, available, empowered, and capable, and have those networks internationally to make their voice heard within the COP process and to really advocate for some of the things that the youth want to see within the climate change and climate action agenda moving forward. So those are really the 3 things that we would like to see happen by COP28 through multiple mediums. And obviously Earth Day being a clear partner in making this a reality. We have a saying in Arabic, 1 hand doesn't clap. You need 2 hands to make noise. And that's the beauty of teamwork. That's the power of the collective, the power of coalition, as Johnny has created within his own institution.
Thank you, Sarah. And Laura Fijanti, Global Partnership Education Goals at COP28.
Well, so 2 different set of things. The first one, obviously, the bread and butter of our work is the work that we do with partner countries. And so we hope that COP, being a moment where really the focus, the attention of all the leaders of the world is on this topic, that this will be an opportunity for the leaders of those countries that haven't started the process of reformulating their curricula, rethinking about they can use their education system to support climate change, that they will learn from those that have actually started this process. So that is the first part. We hope to increase and expand the number of countries that are really adopting these changes and introducing them in their education system. Second part, we are partnering with Dubai Cares to host the second education of the Rewire Education Summit. That will also be an important moment to refocus the attention on this particular topic. And then the final point is that we are working together with the World Bank and Save the Children at developing a paper, a document that will actually outline the impact and cost to education of climate change and identifying transformative investments that actually country can adopt to reduce or minimize this cost. And I think that is really very much at the heart of the conversation that I was briefly having before, that education is an expensive sector that needs more resources than what is currently available at the moment. And so a first good step to be able to ask for more is to demonstrate that you can invest what you have in a more efficient and effective way. So that is one of our hope, that we can mainstream this good practice with several of our partner countries.
Thank you, Laura. And through these goals, this COP will be really a change maker. Haldis, which are the goals of Education International for this COP?
Well, our goal is to continue our Teach for the Planet campaign, to use our network with all our member organizations to advocate also at national level before COP28, because we know countries tend to make up some of their minds before they travel. So it's using what we have of channels of social dialogue and of policy dialogue to try to convince countries that they have to commit to this, and that they have to involve their ministries of education, and they have to involve the finance ministries in going forward. We need the trust. We need the tools to be able to transform. But if I may, it's more than this. It's not just about the future. The injustice is already out there. There are children and people all over the world that are living the consequences of climate change every day already. And it's those who have least who are suffering most. We see every time extreme weather hits, the whole communities disappear, schools disappear, yet another reason for why they lose education. We see children in Pacific Islands that have feared their whole home country will disappear. We need also to support them, whether it's early warning systems, whether it's making sure that the buildings are as safe as possible so that you don't become a double victim of the climate change that's out there, both now and in the future. So we need also to make sure that we take care now. It broke my heart during the pandemic that you had schools that didn't even have rainwater collectors so they could wash their hands. Some of it is very easy to do, but we need to care and we need to finance it, even if it's little, and we need to act.
Thank you. And thank you, Hadi. And Marlene, your goals, the goals of your organization at COP28.
So for us, there's also two parts to it. The first part is being able to bring more youth voices, that is diverse, that's very inclusive, who normally don't have access to these spaces, whether it's because of funding, not having logistical support, safety reasons, the list can go on. And just, provide them with the training and the support that they need to be able to go to COP. Actually, at COP27, we were able to take over 20 youth, which was honestly something we take a lot of pride in. It was, based on like our structure, we're very diverse and inclusive. So we were able to bring more youth voices, and we're not constantly seeing the same ones, so that they can bring their experiences, their perspective, their knowledge. And then the second part is, we're working on creating a plan so that, before we even go to COP, we always work on campaigns and, plans that focus on educating others about youth in the environmental activism space and just advocacy overall. Because, we really believe that, in all spaces, youth and adults can be allies, specifically in a way that's like very healthy and it should just really be focused around the idea that we can learn from each other. We're all teachers and learners. It's not just one always trying to and I really can't think of a better word, but like control or feel superior than the other. I think there's definitely two ends to the spectrum, and being an adult ally to youth really should be more about how can we support and learn and teach, one another. So that's what we're focused on, moving to COP, or on our way to COP.
Thank you very much, Marlon. I would like to ask Kathleen to also describe Earth Day's goals for COP28. And also I would like to ask you to finish our panel with inviting our viewers as well as our speakers to this year's Earth Day.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, everybody. Our goals are, like many of the other speakers articulated. First, we want it to be a negotiating point at the COP. I think it's really important. I think the leadership already is talking about that. We're hoping that the COP presidency will be able to push that as we spend the next 8 months moving there. Finance, of course, is a top priority. And so one of our goals is to bring the mega donors of the world. And there are many. People are giving away $250 million, $300 million without even contacting groups. There is an extraordinary amount of personal wealth, foundation wealth that could be brought to the table. So in addition to GPE and UAE and other countries that are trying to create multilateral funds to pay for climate literacy, we're really calling on the donor community, both individuals and foundations, to step to the table, because we probably all know that some foundations fund education very broadly, or women's or girls' education, but climate literacy isn't on anybody's radar in most of the major foundations. We're working steadily to change that. So we hope by the time we show up at the COP that we will have we're hoping to bring, if we're lucky, at least people who are capable of putting $1, $2, $3 billion out on the table, so that GPE and others can work with them to direct the money in the most important ways. Lastly, we're also looking at G7 and G20 and other organizations, the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, because we want them to take up the mantle. And I think if the COP28 does this, that others will follow. The G20 obviously is in India this year. It's a high priority for us to get the language back in that Italy had already inserted a couple of years ago. Our goal is to get it back in there, pave the way for everything that the COP presidency is doing, the GPE is doing, that Halldis is doing, that the youth are doing. So at the end of the day, we're really about jobs, climate literacy, equity, bringing funding to the table from new sources, and of course, engaging youth in everything we do, since it's their future. I think with respect to Earth Day, our theme, as we mentioned, is invest in our planet. And one of the keys is our second year of the theme. It's been incredibly effective. People are using that hashtag everywhere because it's all about companies, business, faith groups, individuals, and in the environmental community, which has shown no proclivity towards education themselves, to get everybody to invest in different ways. And it is our hope that the billion people that learn about, are educated during the Earth Day process, will understand how important it is to support climate literacy and its connection to jobs and equity. So thank you all. Earth Day is always one of those monumental things that we at least assist in making happen. So the more people that participate in it and know about the efforts of all of you, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.